Hello and welcome to Newsroom's latest episode of Raw Politics. This is a weekly visual and audio political chat with myself, Jo Moyer, my colleague and, as of Tuesday, officially published author Sam Suchdever. Hello.
Hello.
And this week we have special guest in Auckland, Newsroom's pro-editor, Jonathan Milne.
Kia ora. Am I still allowed to say that?
We'll allow it. We're chatting this week about National's muddling of race relations and the housing bipartisanship that is no more. To wrap things up, we'll each have a recommendation for something that we've enjoyed this week that we think that you might like as well. To begin with, we're going to get into National and the race relations issue of late. We're talking bilingual signs, te reo names for government departments. It's been an interesting week in Parliament. We've had a lot of sort of back and forth, clarifications, corrections, U-turns. It's been a little bit all over the show, hasn't it, Sam? What have you made, I guess, of the fact that these issues continue to come up for National? A lot of people at the meetings that they are having at the moment want to be talking about co-governance, Māori issues. It's not dominating meetings by any means. There's a lot of other issues out there, but this seems to be a particular area where National hasn't quite worked out what its line is and then finds itself having to kind of correct the record when things start to get questioned, like what happened with Simeon Brown when he was at a public meeting at the end of last week and found himself saying that he didn't think that there should be any te reo on road signs, particularly not on safety signs, and that they should be English only. It's kind of caused a bit of an uproar, and you've had, Labour coming out and accusing National of dog whistling. But you've also had Christopher Luxon, Nicola Willis, Chris Bishop put under the pump as well about how they've reacted, sort of walking it back, but then trying to change tack and not want to talk about race relations at all, trying to talk about potholes, which was completely unrelated. Have they completely messed this up, or do you think that they're just kind of finding their way?
I would tend towards the former more than the latter. We did talk about this a little bit last week, right? What Christopher Luxon had said regarding te reo names for government departments and the perils of being sucked in by a microcosm of New Zealand, the microcosm that comes to town hall events. And then sure enough, the evening after we released the podcast, Simeon Brown steps in it. So it doesn't seem to be a deliberate thing. And this is something that all oppositions have to deal with. There's this line that Andrew Little said it when he was opposition leader. Simon Bridges said it when he was opposition leader. We don't need to bark at every passing car. We need to focus on the issues that a select number of key issues that matter. And for National, those would presumably be inflation, cost of living, and everything in that space related to the economy. So every sort of hour that they're spending talking about whether or not we should have an expressway sign that has te reo on it just seems to be a waste of their time for me. So I don't see that it's something that they are deliberately trying to do. And if they are, it's just a terrible approach.
John, I want to bring you in here, particularly from an Auckland viewpoint. I mean, does this stuff matter? Does it sort of resonate with people, or is everyone kind of banging their heads saying there are so many more important things to be talking about? And particularly, I'm interested in what you think about the way that National is trying to move away from talking about the race issue, which is what has been in the media, and make it about whether the government's got its priorities right or wrong. Do you think that that's resonating with people?
I think National's got a problem that it's trying to talk to several different audiences at the same time, and perhaps it's typecasting each of those audiences. What we've seen is a National Party that's clearly trying to and explicitly trying to diversify its candidate list, trying to get fresh voices in there. I read in your piece this week, Jo, that Chris Luxon's learning to speak te reo. But on the other hand, they're still falling into the trap of trying to woo what they see as an old conservative rump, I think. I don't actually see the thing is, I think most voters want to think that they're educating themselves and getting smarter, and to hear Simeon Brown tell them that most of us, it's too hard to try and understand a safety sign if it's got Māori on it as well. I don't think that's actually speaking very well to most of us. Whether conservative rural rump or whether urban liberals, because we actually want to think we're getting a little bit smarter and teaching ourselves how to get by in the world.
Yeah, if you zoom out to a macro level, and I think Conservative commentator and hated podcast rival Ben Thomas talked about it on Twitter this week, is that if you look at the successful national governments of the last 2 decades and their leaders, Jim Bolger and John Key, both took pretty progressive approaches to race relations. So it doesn't seem to me that going sort of hard on this idea of a treaty grievance machine or racial separatism. I don't think there's a huge constituency for it, and I think you're right, John. It is looking at this rump who are, if they're going to go anywhere, if they're not happy with National on this, they're just going to go to ACT anyway, so that the right is not losing these votes. So,
as part of the problem here, the audience they're getting because of when these sorts of meetings are being held. I mean, you look at the Getting New Zealand Back on Track tour, all of the meetings have been sort of around 12:31 in the afternoon for a couple of hours on weekdays. Now, that's a particular type of audience you're pulling in. If you look at the meeting that Simeon Brown was at, where he created this mess in the first place, he was in Tauranga, which, for the most part is a particular type of population as well, slightly older, I mean by that. And so you're talking to a very particular demographic, and I guess what would be interesting to see is Christopher Luxon out and about at, meetings at sort of 7 o'clock in the evening and in the weekends, and seeing a more varied population and a wider demographic, and actually look at some of the issues that come up. Interestingly, I'm going to go to the New Plymouth meeting this week, which, again, it's at 12:30 in the afternoon on a Friday. So I think you're probably going to get a similar sort of vibe to what we've been seeing at these other meetings. So to me, that's kind of part of the problem as well. But yeah, I mean, it would be good to see the other issues being discussed. And I'm not saying that there aren't things like the economy, inflation, cost of living is coming up at these meetings. But for some reason, National's getting themselves really tongue-tied and responding to what actually should be fairly simple questions with simple answers, and things like, Christopher Luxon could very easily say, I'm on my own Te Reo journey, I'm all for it. If it's not for everyone, that's fine. But the point of a sign being bilingual is that it has English and it has Te Reo. Yep. Nobody's been excluded by that. So I don't really understand the argument of sort of taking the easy path in these meetings and kind of agreeing with this audience that, this sort of transformation and progressiveness around Te Reo is terrible, when A, media are there, so it's going to be covered and talked about, and B, as soon as they return to Parliament, they do a U-turn on it and say, that's not what we meant, we were actually talking about potholes, which, by the way, is utter rubbish.
And look, this is not a defence of National's leadership at present, but what I would say is it's been a long and difficult problem for them. We all remember, and when Todd Muller announced his frontbench lineup, and Nikki Kay, desperate to show how diverse they were, told the media that Paul Goldsmith was Ngāti Porou, and Paul Goldsmith came out slightly abashed and said, yeah, nah.
To be fair, Jono, we get a lot of mileage out of that, so that's an okay thing to have happened.
And I'd also note that it's not just National, that right now is having problems with where it stands in relation to Māori electorates. We've seen both Labour and the Greens prominently and very publicly and very embarrassingly lose Māori MPs who have perhaps not directly or explicitly, but it's been pretty implicit, expressed unhappiness with the way that they feel that their parties treat Māori and treat Māori MPs. And this does really provide quite an opening, I would have thought, for Te Pāti Māori going into this election, because they will be looking to capitalise on the difficulties that National, Labour and the Greens have all had dealing with their Māori caucuses, dealing with Māori constituents. And I do wonder if Christopher Luxon, when it comes to the election and suddenly he discovers that Te Pāti Māori is the kingmaker, just how hard he'll hold to that line of ruling them out.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, Jono, to raise Labour and the Greens and sort of issues there that they're having, because what I found particularly interesting in the case of Meka Whaitiri defecting to Te Pāti Māori is that right from the start, and I wrote this in a piece, having spoken to people within the Labour Party, they already knew that it was because of the change of leadership. It was a change away from sort of, being a little bit more progressive and the sort of Labour Māori space to more centrist, which is what we've seen with Chris Hipkins' leadership and moving more towards the centre. And, you know, we called that out and said that was the reason that Mika Whaitiri was defecting. And, of course, she denied it and didn't respond to it. And then a couple of weeks later ended up saying, well, actually, Chris Hipkins' leadership was actually to blame. So it's a problem for Labour and the Greens as well that they're going to have to work out, basically, in the next few months leading into the election.
Yeah, and I think we will be looking very closely at the party lists when they come out, because I was looking at the existing list of candidates from National, which of course is their mostly inherited from the last election rather than their list for 2023. And you know what? You can go an awful long way down that list and not find many more Māori candidates. I think they'll really need to make sure that they're promoting candidates like Dan Bidwar, for instance, who was in Parliament and is bidding to return there. But I think the same will be true of the other parties as well. They'll be wanting to look widely across their lists and make sure they're not just reaching out to Māori constituencies, but obviously more diversely as well to women and to other groups.
Onto the housing accord between Labour and National, that is no more. What we've seen this week is bipartisanship on housing completely fall apart, and some mean words actually between the Housing Minister Megan Woods and National's housing spokesperson Chris Bishop. This, of course, all took place on Sunday when Labour was in the middle of its election year congress, and we saw National come out and announce that they had changed up their housing policy around medium density in cities. This was all part of a 2021 accord that they signed with Labour. Obviously, a deliberate strategy to sort of unsettle Labour on one of their big days of the year. Chris Hipkins up on the stage in front of party faithful. But it's interesting in the sense that here we are sort of, I lose track, what are we, 4 months out from the election? Is that what we're saying now? And we've got a situation where things that people thought were safe, I guess, for want of a better word, when it came to developers and being able to push ahead with building residential housing in places like Auckland and other main cities, that they had some sort of understanding that whatever the government in the future, National and Labour are on the same page as this. And National's decided to go off on another track and announce what is their policy for the campaign. It's interesting to me because Labour's now been put in this situation where they've effectively said, we want to come back to the negotiating table, and are basically prepared to change the policy to suit National in order to keep that bipartisanship, which is a massive sort of power move and leverage position for National to be in, to have Labour kind of bending over to them when they're the ones who at the moment are a single party majority government. It's almost comical, really. And we've had this exchange of letters between Megan Woods and Chris Bishop about wanting to come in and sit down. My understanding of that, Sam, is that you've got basically Chris Bishop saying that it's our way or the highway, so we're happy to talk about this and we're happy to tell you what our position is, but we're not going to budge beyond that. That's not really a very good starting position for a negotiating table, is it?
No, but to be honest, do they actually want a negotiated outcome? This is a triumph, I think, of electoral politics over good policy. If we talk about the substance, the Nats have been getting hammered in suburban parts of Auckland, suburban parts of Christchurch. You've had a lot of their own MPs making noises about it. Simon O'Connor, I think, this week claiming credit for getting it killed. So I don't know that they want to try and come up with some sort of compromise that comes closer to the status quo that they had agreed upon. So, they get to put this out, they get to win back some of those suburban voters, and, if Labour adopts some of their policies, great. If not, then they get to say, look, we're the ones who are looking after you people who don't want your historic villas nearby raised for just for the small insignificant issue of affordable housing in a country that still has problems in its housing market. So look, I think it's disappointing. I'll be interested to see where the proposals go. There's probably more actually to be gained for Labour than National in some respects if there is an agreement that's reached. If Labour can pick up some of National's things and keep some of its own. But I think it remains to be seen whether or not that actually comes to anything, given we are a very short way out from the campaign trail.
Jono, the trust thing is quite important, I think, because when that accord was signed in 2021, voters went, okay, that's a thing that's happening, National and Labour agreed to it, and we've got some certainty around that. Now I feel like whenever there might be any bipartisan deal, in the future, whether it be in the next few months or the next few years, anyone who's reading any story about it will go, well, why would we trust or believe that? Because apparently the minute there's an election campaign, it doesn't mean anything anymore and we'll just do our own thing. Is that a problem for bipartisanship in any area in the future?
Yeah, look, I was emceeing a local government conference a few days ago, and I'm talking to a lot of mayors and chief executives there. And sure, they're all talking about funding. Sure, they're all talking about Three Waters. Sure, they're all talking about transport. But if there's one overwhelming message I heard from local government, it's please give us some surety. Please give us some security. Please allow us to plan ahead. They've got to draw up 10-year long-term plans and 30-year visions. And they've got these central government flip-flopping like, I don't know what flip-flops, a tadpole or something. That does make it very difficult for them. Nicola Willis came and spoke to them, as did Karen McAnulty, and I have to say that what I've seen of Nicola Willis and Chris Bishop, they're putting a brave face on it. They're standing by Luxon's new policy, despite the fact that he's overturned all their hard work. But I do think it makes it potentially difficult for them, and definitely difficult for local government. And coming back to your question, Joe, there's been talk this week of new multi-party talks over issues like congestion charging, for instance. And I just really struggle to conceive that that could be possible now, that could be achieved in the 4 months between now and the election, because the trust between the parties has no doubt been damaged. And I think for National to enter into another such accord would also just raise the question again for them among the public and local government as, but you backed out of the last one.
Very briefly on local government, because I think it's a good point, Jono. Part of the reason this density standard was going to be mandatory is because councils find it really hard when they deal with blowback on some of these issues. So the central government needs to be the bad cop a little bit. We've seen it around things like fluoridation, I think Easter trading, where councils really want that help and want to be able to say, look, our hands are tied, we have to do this. So to unwind that, it is a big issue. And I think you're going to need bipartisan consensus on the issues where local government are a little bit find it too hard to take action themselves.
I think while we're talking about housing, we also need to talk about the other housing announcement this week from Parliament as well. We had Cyclone Recovery Minister Grant Robertson start to lay out where things are headed for those regions that have been affected by severe weather events over the last few months, including Cyclone Gabrielle. What we've seen is the sort of beginning stages of mapping for regions looking at Category 3 houses, which are ones that basically they can't mitigate the risks anymore. So there will be some form of buyout for people with those residential homes. That will be a combination of local government money, central government money. Of course, insurers are involved as well, and in many cases there will be payouts from insurers. Of course, some properties won't have had insurance though. Then there's also Category 2, which is those properties that have been badly affected can remain, but then there's work that needs to be done around mitigation in terms of flood stop banks, things like that. And there's already a fund that was set up in the budget last month. 100 million went in initially for that, which is going to be able to push on with work in that area. It's going to be interesting to see if the numbers shift a bit. So at the moment, the estimates are that 700 homes are in that Category 3, and they're looking at about 10,000 in that Category 2. Interestingly, 2 of the 700 in Category 3, 400 of those homes are actually in Auckland, which surprised me because I actually thought more of them would have been in the Hawke's Bay, Tairāwhiti area, but the bulk of them are at the moment in Auckland. There's going to be a consultation period, which means that those people who have been told that they're in Category 3 or 2 can talk that through. They might think that they should be in another category, etc., etc. But this is a whole new world we're in, right? We're having to deal with managed retreat. We have previously had lots of floods in places like Westport, Nelson in the South Island, where people have just rebuilt. We've got the Christchurch earthquake situation. And Grant Robertson's very clear about wanting to learn from the red zone mistakes. Interested, Sam, you've covered a lot of the Christchurch red zone. There's still people living in those red zone areas, obviously don't have insurance, refuse to ever leave. It'll be interesting to see whether there are people who decide to do that in this situation as well, and just how much bigger potentially the problem might become.
Yeah. I mean, there was a really fraught issue in Christchurch after the earthquakes, and that dragged out for a long time. And you do have, I think, maybe a handful of occupants, if that, in the old red zone. So it's hard, and people form an attachment to these areas, and they don't want to leave because they've spent generations there, and their grandparents have lived there, and their great-grandparents. So, yeah, it'll be a difficult thing for the government. There'll be lots of sort of tough luck stories and personal stories from people who feel like they're being forced away. So it's a tough one to manage.
How do you think this is going to go, Jono, moving into this new world of climate change and dealing with that and managed retreat in general, and getting often difficult relationships between local government and central government and communities to actually integrate and work to sort of solve these issues? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about this?
Well, look, I've been talking in the last week to families who still live on the Papakainga and Wairoa around the marae, who say we will never leave. No one is going to make us leave this our family site here. I've also been talking to homeowners in Auckland who say we must be reimbursed. We must get some kind of payout so we can leave, because we cannot ever feel safe on our house again. We want out. So the government and local government, as you rightly point out, Joe, are really caught there. And what I'm hearing is increasing talk of litigation already. We're not going to get through this without ending up in the courts, I don't think, because there will be people who will fight tooth and nail to be allowed to stay on their land, and there will be people who will fight equally hard to gain compensation to enable them to move and make a fresh start somewhere where they can feel safe.
Our newsroom audience question today is there a danger with so many new high-profile ACT candidates that some incumbent MPs are going to miss out on winnable list spots? And what will that mean for caucus unity? Sam?
In a word, yes. I think it will be. It'll be difficult because actually David Seymour and ACT deserve a lot of credit for keeping the caucuses united and stable and scandal-free as they have in the last 3 years. But you introduce more people into the mix, it does get harder and egos get involved. Now, he was saying earlier in the week when he was asked about this, look, all our caucus are going to stay in and we're going to get more people because the polling is good for them at the moment. But if that changes, you get people who are on the bubble, then I think you might see a little bit more fire and sort of internal scrapping. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
Hot takes, Jono?
In a word, no. The half the MPs in ACT, we don't know who they are anyway. David Seymour has around him a small number of effective senior MPs. I'm thinking Nicole McKee, I'm thinking Brooke Van Velden, I'm thinking Simon Court. Most of us couldn't name the rest of them. I know you guys are different, but I'm in Auckland, so. And they'll be gone after the election. The ones who get relegated down the list, they're gone. So it does no harm whatsoever to caucus unity.
Let's wrap things up with some recommendations, something you've watched, read or listened to this week that you have enjoyed. Sam, would you like to take it away?
Yes, I am recommending a great piece from Katie Kenny at Stuff. She's part of their fact-checking project, The Whole Truth. It was a story about these sort of rumours being peddled around that the World Health Organization is on the cusp of taking over New Zealand's health system and stopping us from having any sovereignty in terms of what we do, which is untrue. You'll be shocked to hear. But she went into a little bit more detail than that, sort of unpicked exactly what the WHO is looking at in terms of its new international health regulations and why New Zealand does still have decision-making powers, of, the sovereignty and decision-making. So it's important to have people doing work like that, I think, and explaining to the wider public what is and isn't true.
My recommendation this week is a interview that was on Morning Report. They had host Craig McCulloch, who's normally in the gallery here with us, doing a bit of hosting. He did a very superb job. And he was interviewing Chris Bishop earlier in the week. The title of that interview was National Withdrawals from Bipartisan Housing Policy. Craig's really across housing, and it was just a really punchy interview where he was pushing back, and it was a really, really good listen. So I highly recommend that one on Radio New Zealand.
And my recommendation, and I'm actually recommending a book I haven't yet read. It's The China Tightrope by my colleague Sam Sachdeva. And my copy hasn't arrived yet, but I do have the benefit of having read a couple of excellent extracts from it. I know this sounds like back scratching for Sam, but I myself had considered writing a book on a similar topic. And I abandoned the idea as just too hard because the parameters of this topic around New Zealand and the Pacific's relationship with China are so broad, and I do not know where you start and where you finish. And enormous kudos to Sam for managing to find that line.
Thanks, Jono. Those of you who are listening rather than watching, Joe has been ceremonially holding up the book this whole time. Available in a local bookstore near you, and that is the first and last time I will directly plug my own content, so thank you.
I'm allowed to second, third, I don't know what we're up to with this, but I also just want to say amazing effort. I don't know how you did it either. It was fun to witness you going through that process. I'm looking forward to us getting our office couch back and more of us being allowed to lie on it sometimes. But no, very, very proud of you, Sam. Incredible. Everyone, go out, buy one. And that's it from Raw Politics for this week. Thank you to our producers, Hugo Stewart and Mark Jennings, our readers, listeners and watchers. Please do send me any burning questions you have so that we can attempt to answer them. You can email me, joe.moyer@newsroom.co.nz. Thank you to Sam and Jono for your contributions.
Thank you.
You can find us next week, same time, same place, here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.